I wasn't always the person you see today. In fact, for most of my life, I was the one standing in the background, quiet, unsure, and terrified of everything that might go wrong. I didn't choose to be brave. I was forced to face something that changed me forever. This is the story of how I stopped running and started becoming someone I never thought I could be. Hello family, welcome to Storytime with Imzi. Please subscribe and like. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. I was never the kind of person who stood tall. As far back as I can remember, fear and I walked side by side. In school, when kids roughhoused and dared each other to jump from rooftops or sneak into the woods at night, I was always the one with an excuse. A stomachache, a sprained ankle, a forgotten curfew. The truth was simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Of pain, of failure, of being seen as weak, though ironically, that was already my reputation. My earliest memory of fear cementing its grip on me came in 3rd grade, when Evan Thatcher punched me in the stomach during recess for cutting in line. I didn't hit back. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell the teacher. I just stood there, winded and small, my eyes locked on the asphalt. I remember the heat in my face, the pounding of my heart, the voice in my head screaming, "Do something." But I didn't. And from that day on, it became a pattern. Avoid conflict. Stay invisible. Survive. As I got older, the fears evolved with me. They grew sharper, more sophisticated. I feared rejection, so I never asked anyone out. I feared disappointment, so I never tried anything where failure was even remotely possible. I feared confrontation, so I let people walk all over me. Friends came and went, but none stayed long. I was the quiet one in the background, always agreeable, always safe. Safe was my religion. Even my dreams betrayed me. I'd have nightmares where I stood frozen while others screamed for help, unable to move, unable to speak, as danger closed in. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, breath shallow. And the worst part, I knew deep down that those dreams weren't far from the truth. At some point, I convinced myself that being cautious was just being smart. Let the heroes run headfirst into burning buildings and fight off the villains. Let the bold take the risks and earn the glory. I told myself the world needed people like me too, quiet observers, thinkers, the careful ones. But that was a lie. A lie I clung to like a shield, hoping no one would notice the trembling behind it. And then came the night everything changed. But I'll get to that. For now, all you need to know is this: I wasn't born brave. I was born scared. And I was very, very good at it. It was a Thursday night in mid-October, the kind of night where the wind seemed to whisper secrets and every shadow looked like it was hiding something. I remember it vividly, not because I sensed anything coming, but because I had almost stayed home. I was supposed to meet some co-workers for drinks at a bar near the old train station, a rundown part of town no one had cared about since the factories shut down. But I'd made a promise, and backing out would have been too obvious. So I went. We laughed. We drank. I pretended to enjoy myself, the way I always did, off to the side, smiling politely, nursing a single beer for hours. Around 10 p.m., I slipped away unnoticed, deciding to walk the long way home past the train station. The place had always creeped me out: graffiti-covered walls, rusted tracks, broken lights flickering like they were still trying to be useful. It was a graveyard for movement, a place time had abandoned. I was halfway down the block when I saw the smoke. At first, it was subtle, a thin gray stream curling into the night sky, just barely visible under the streetlights. Then I heard it shouting. A child's voice. It wasn't panic at first, just loud, like someone calling out. But as I got closer, the tone changed. It turned into raw, scraping terror. My feet stopped. Instantly, like they were glued to the sidewalk. The fire hadn't fully bloomed yet, just small flames licking up the wooden side of the old ticket booth. The building, condemned years ago, was mostly empty except for the homeless who sometimes found shelter there. But now I could see the flickering inside, something orange moving. And then I saw him. A boy, maybe 10, pressed against a dirty window, his hands pounding against the glass. He was trapped. My breath caught. My legs twitched. My heart slammed in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. And then I turned around. I walked away. Not ran. Not stumbled. I walked. Fast, yes. But deliberate. Focused. I told myself I didn't know what I was doing. That someone else would help. That I didn't know how to break in, or if the place would explode, or if it was even real. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the boy wasn't even really there. Every excuse I'd spent my life perfecting came back to life in those few steps. It wasn't until I got home, locked the door, and stared blankly at the wall that I let it sink in. I had left a child to burn. The news broke the next morning. Fire at abandoned train station, boy critically injured but alive. A passing cyclist had seen the smoke, smashed the window with a rock, and pulled him out. The boy, Liam, had suffered burns and smoke inhalation. He was in the hospital, fighting. I stared at his picture on the screen, his face blackened by soot, and I felt something crack inside me. Not because of the boy's pain. Because I could have helped. I could have saved him. But I didn't. And for the first time in my life, cowardice didn't feel like safety. It felt like a curse. In the days that followed the fire, I found it nearly impossible to look people in the eye, especially myself. Mornings became unbearable. I'd wake before the alarm, already tense, already sweating. I'd go through the motions, shower, brush teeth, get dressed, but everything felt hollow. My reflection in the mirror became a stranger. Same face, same eyes, but now there was something behind them. Not sadness. Not fear. Something sharper. Uglier. Contempt. I couldn't stop seeing the boy's face. Liam. Pressed against the glass. Lips moving in a scream I never heard because I was too busy running away. I kept telling myself he lived, that someone else had saved him, that it didn't matter anymore. But it did. It mattered more than anything. For the first time in my life, fear didn't protect me. It exposed me. Stripped me bare. And when I looked at myself now, all I saw was a man built entirely out of small escapes and quiet lies. A man who, when it counted, turned his back. I started avoiding people more than usual. I skipped work. Stopped answering texts. I stayed indoors with the curtains closed and the TV on mute. Even silence felt accusatory. I spent hours staring at my reflection, searching for any trace of the person I thought I could be. Someone better. Braver. But I found nothing. Until one night I snapped. I stood in front of the mirror, my hands gripping the sink, knuckles white. My voice came out like a whisper, but it felt like a scream. You're a coward. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just nodded. That was the moment something shifted. Not a transformation, not some cinematic breakthrough, but a flicker. A thought. Maybe I don't have to stay this way. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was the first time I let myself believe that maybe being afraid wasn't the whole story. That maybe, just maybe, the man I saw in the mirror didn't have to be the final version of me. The next day, I opened the curtains. I let the light in. And for the first time since the fire, I left the apartment without hiding behind headphones or sunglasses. I didn't know where I was going, not exactly. But I knew I had to go somewhere. Do something. Because if I didn't, I'd rot from the inside out. I ended up at the community center by accident, or at least that's what I told myself. Truth was, I'd walked past it for years without ever going inside. A squat, aging brick building wedged between a laundromat and a closed-down bakery. It always had flyers taped to the windows, first aid courses, food drives, job fairs. I never gave them a second glance. But this time I stopped. I stared at one in particular. Emergency response training, free. No experience required. Tuesdays. 6 p.m. My fingers trembled as I tore the flyer down. That Tuesday, I sat in a folding chair in a room that smelled faintly of rubber mats and old sweat, surrounded by strangers who all looked like they belonged more than I did. Parents, college kids, retirees, all chatting like they'd done this before. I nearly walked out before the session began. Then he walked in. He didn't say much at first. Just stood at the front of the room, arms folded, eyes scanning us like we were soldiers reporting for duty. His name was Jake. Late 50s. Square jaw, buzz cut, worn jeans, and a firefighter's badge stitched to the sleeve of his hoodie. He looked like a man who'd seen more fire than sun. But his voice, it was calm. Measured. Real. This class won't make you fearless, he said, his eyes locking with mine for a fraction of a second. It'll just show you how to act anyway. That hit me. Over the next few weeks, I kept coming back. I learned how to perform CPR, how to use a fire extinguisher, how to assess a scene. But more than that, Jake taught us how to think under pressure, how to breathe when chaos screamed in your ear, how to move forward even when your brain begged you to freeze. He never made me feel small for asking dumb questions, or for the way I hesitated during drills. He didn't coddle, but he didn't shame either. He just kept showing up, kept watching. One night after class, when I stayed behind to help put away the dummies and gear bags, he asked, "You ever freeze before?" I nodded. "Yeah, badly." He didn't ask for details. He just said, "Then you've already seen the worst of yourself. Now let's figure out what else you've got in you." That stuck with me. Jake became more than a teacher. He became a mirror, too, but one that didn't just reflect who I was. He reflected who I might become. Someone who could walk toward the fire. Someone who could help. I started training harder. Showing up early. Staying late. Not because I wanted to impress him, but because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from who I was. I was chasing who I could be. It was a bitter January afternoon when the test came. Not the kind you circle with a red pen on a calendar, but the kind that barrels into your life without warning, daring you to be ready. I was walking home from the community center, the snow crunching beneath my boots, the air sharp enough to sting. The sky had that heavy gray look it gets before a storm, and the streets were quieter than usual. I had my head down, hood up, hands buried in my coat pockets when I heard the screech. Tires on ice. A metallic slam. Then silence. I looked up just in time to see a silver sedan skidding through a guardrail and plummeting down an embankment toward the frozen lake at the edge of the park. Everything stopped. The car hit the ice. It cracked like glass under pressure, slow at first, then violent. A terrible creaking sound filled the air as the vehicle slid, half submerged, toward the center of the lake. Someone screamed. A woman, I think. A few people on the jogging path were already pulling out their phones. No one moved. Not toward the water. Not toward the car. Just stood, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the moment. I was one of them. For exactly 3 seconds. Then something inside me snapped. I dropped my bag. Vaulted over the park fence. My legs were moving before I could think. My heart was a drumbeat, but my mind was clear. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I was, and I'd finally learned how to run with it. The ice groaned under my weight as I approached the car. The front end was already under, the back windows fogged. Inside, I saw him, middle-aged man, dazed, struggling with his seatbelt. Water was already seeping in through the floor. "Hey!" I shouted, pounding the glass. "Can you hear me?" His eyes locked on mine. He nodded weakly. I searched for a rock. Nothing. I peeled off my coat and wrapped it around my elbow. "Act anyway," Jake's voice echoed in my head. I struck the window. It didn't break. Again. Crack. Again. Shatter. Cold air exploded out as the glass gave way. I reached in, my arms going numb the second they touched the freezing water, and unclipped his seatbelt. He didn't resist. Just let me pull him slowly, clumsily, out of the car and onto the ice. It was thinner now. I felt it shift beneath us. We crawled, flat on our stomachs, inch by inch, back toward the shore as the ice behind us fractured into floating shards. Hands reached out, pulled him up, pulled me up. Then came the noise, sirens shouting chaos. But I didn't hear any of it. I sat on the bank, soaked to the bone, shaking from cold and adrenaline, staring at the lake that had almost swallowed us both. And I realized something simple, something enormous. I had acted. Not because I was trained. Not because it was safe. Because it was right. The story hit the local news within hours. Bystander rescues man from icy lake in daring winter save. There was cell phone footage, grainy, shaky video of me crawling across the ice, dragging the man behind me. My face wasn't visible, but someone got my name. They always do. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Old coworkers messaged. People from high school I hadn't spoken to in a decade. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls I didn't answer, voicemails I didn't check. I didn't want attention. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't even feel proud. I just felt quiet. I went back to the community center the next day. Jake was there, of course, standing by the gear closet, arms crossed like he'd been waiting for me. "Thought you might show up," he said, like I'd just come back from a weekend trip. No smile. No big speech. "I couldn't not," I said. He nodded. "You scared?" "Terrified." He chuckled once. "Good." That was it. That was all he said. But it was enough. For a while, I thought the fear would leave me, that doing something brave would somehow erase the cowardice. But it didn't. I still jumped when I heard a car crash. Still hesitated when I saw someone trip in the street. Still froze now and then when my brain screamed, "What if you fail?" But the difference now was, I moved anyway. And people noticed. Not just strangers. Not just reporters. One night, as I left the center, a teenager who'd joined the class a few weeks earlier caught up to me outside. Awkward kid. Kept his hood up. Never said much. "Hey," he mumbled, eyes on the ground. "That was you, right? The lake thing?" I paused. "Yeah." He nodded. "Cool." Then, after a beat, I would have frozen. I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. "I used to," I said. "A lot." He looked up at me like that was the last thing he expected to hear. Then he smiled, barely. "See you next week." He turned and walked off. Just like that. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just changing myself anymore. My story, my failures, my shame, my choice to act anyway, was changing other people too. And that felt bigger than the fear. Liam. His name appeared in my inbox like a ghost I had half hoped would stay buried. The subject line read, "Not sure if you remember me." But of course I did. I remembered everything. It had been almost a year since the fire at the train station. Since I walked away from a scared boy pounding on a glass window while the world burned around him. He'd survived. I'd changed. But we had never spoken, not a word, not a message. Until now. The email was short. Kind. Somehow more composed than I was ready for. "Hey, I'm Liam. From the fire. I saw what you did at the lake. I knew your name sounded familiar. Would you be willing to meet? I've got questions." I sat there staring at those lines for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, retreating every time I tried to type. What could I say? That I didn't deserve his kindness? That I had abandoned him? But in the end, I said yes. We met at a small park. Not far from the train station, ironically. He was older now, maybe 13. Tall for his age. A light burned scar peeked out from under the collar of his hoodie, but his eyes were clear. Calm. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look like I had. "I remember you," he said as we sat on opposite ends of a bench. No accusation. Just fact. "I know," I replied. "And I'm sorry." Silence hung between us. It wasn't heavy. Just real. "I was screaming for someone," he said. "I thought you didn't see me." "I did." My voice cracked. "I saw everything. And I ran." He looked at me for a long moment. Then shrugged. "But you didn't run this time." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "I wish I could go back," I said. "Do it differently." He nodded. "Me too. But if you had, maybe you wouldn't have saved that guy on the ice. Or helped the kid in our building last month. Or started that training group. You didn't just change. You became someone other people count on." The wind picked up, cold and dry, rustling the trees behind us. "Liam," I said, "how are you not angry at me?" He shrugged again, but this time, there was a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Because people don't stay who they were. You didn't." And then he said something that undid me. "You gave me a story where the scared guy becomes the hero." I needed that. We sat in silence for a while longer, both staring off toward the horizon where the sky was starting to soften into evening. I had dreaded this meeting for months. I'd imagined blame, bitterness, or worse, indifference. But instead, I found something else. Forgiveness. And with it, I finally forgave myself. They don't call me a coward anymore. Not because I suddenly became fearless, but because I stopped letting fear decide who I was going to be. These days, I wear a reflective vest with trainer stitched across the back. I run weekly emergency response workshops at the community center, where new faces show up, shaking hands, darting eyes, exactly the way I did. They come in carrying their own silences, their own scars. Some are still haunted by the moment they didn't act. Others haven't faced it yet, but they know it's coming. I see it in the way they sit too straight, or avoid the fire drill dummies altogether. I tell them my story. All of it. Not the polished version, not the news headline. The raw, ugly truth. The train station. The boy. The ice. The fear. They always go quiet when I admit I ran. But they really listen when I say, that moment didn't get to define me. I did. Jake still shows up sometimes, arms crossed in the back of the room like an old sergeant watching a rookie prove himself. He never says much, but every once in a while, I catch him smirking when I shout, "What's the first rule of rescue?" And the group answers in unison, "Breathe. Then move." Outside of the center, I'm still just a guy. Not famous. Not flashy. I still get nervous in crowds, still hesitate before big conversations, still lie awake some nights replaying scenes I wish I could erase. But now I understand something simple. Bravery isn't about big cinematic moments. It's not about saving lives or headlines or applause. It's about showing up. It's stepping forward when you'd rather disappear. Speaking up when silence is safer. Choosing to be someone who moves, not because it's easy, but because it matters. And the best part, anyone can do it, even someone like me, because I wasn't born brave. I built it, one hard choice at a time.